the topic of my of this presentation, I'm going to make some kind of history of what has been the introduction of Iberian lynx in Portugal, and also in Spain. A very complicated process. I have the chance and the luck of being involved in it since the beginning, because I'm connected with this species since 1994, so almost 30 years, about 27 years of work with this species. And well, what is really important is that when you look at this first slide, I will talk about the title, but then we have a quotation that we use in a book that was published about 10 years ago when the captive breeding program started, and they asked us to write a chapter about the situation in Portugal. And by that time, it was a very complicated situation with a virtual extinction of the species. But every chapter had to have some quotation from some historical figure, and we decided to put this one. We will either find a way or make one. So this means that we were committed in recovering the Iberian lynx, but in that point, we were not sure what was the way to do it. But we were so committed that we just tell ourselves that we are going to take the lynx no matter what. And so what happens in terms of history, basically this species, which is a distinct species from the other lynx that occurs in Europe and Asia, the Asiatic lynx, which is rather larger than the Iberian lynx. But historically, that dashed line on top and north of the Iberian lynx represents the northern range of the species historically. So the species was historically distributed for most of the Iberian Peninsula, and currently we know that it also occurred in some places in the south of France. But it suffered a very, very, very considerable decline, particularly by the mid of the 20th century. And well, circa 1960, the species was already facing some good problems, and it was the current distribution by them was in the center and southeast of the Iberian Peninsula, about 1,500 to 2,000 lynxes were estimated, which is not a very good number, because we have to consider that the species only occurred in the Iberian Peninsula, so we're talking about the world population of a species, of a canon. And the area occupied by the species was about 10,000 square kilometers. So with several nucleus, probably all connected by this person, with probably the most important one here in the center that occupies the mountains, but also all the corridor of the Serra Morena that extended to Portugal. And in Portugal, there were probably 3 populations, but most of them were probably connected also with the Spanish population. But it was the time where people started to realize that the species was probably facing some problems. And so what happened in the ensuing years is that the species declined dramatically. And so dramatically that in the beginning of this century, the lynx was just restricted to 2 breeding populations. One of them in the eastern part of Serra Morena, and the rest were about 60 to 70, only 60 to 70 individuals living in an isolated population with high levels of inbreeding. And the second population in Guadiana, in south of Spain, this one facing terrible problems, not only because of the isolation, but also because they have in those years a very severe problem with leukemia. And so this was the baseline situation in the beginning of the 20th century. The species was facing an imminent extinction, and so something was needed to be done to recover. And another problem was that these 2 populations were located in the same region of Spain, in the Andalusia. So a species that was in the past distributed by 2 countries in several autonomous regions was now only in one autonomic region. So the future of conservation of the species was completely dependent on Andalusia. And so things were getting a little bit difficult. So what happened? Why this species was so threatened then? Well, for several reasons. First of all, human persecution. the lynx was extremely persecuted during, especially during the second half of the 20th century. There were several campaigns in Portugal and Spain that were conducted to eradicate predators. And the lynx was hunted by all possible means, not only by gunfire, but also by traps, snares, foot traps, everything. So that was probably critical for letting the lynx to an almost extinction. And although it was fully protected in Portugal in 1957, the species continued to be persecuted. There was lots of cases, especially by poaching activity. That photograph that is on the lynx that was poisoned already during the reintroduction. It's the only documented case that we have of that was a victim of a poaching activity. But in fact, this was probably a major cause. But there were also other causes such as the habitat destruction, the conversion of the Iberian scrubland, which is the typical habitat of the lynx in immunized landscapes, not only for agriculture but also for forests, such as eucalyptus plantations and other forms of habitat conversion. And also, one of the major problems that happens was the regression, the strong regression of the European wild rabbit, which is the main prey of the lynx. Lynxes can prey in other things, but they are extremely dependent on rabbits, mostly during the reproduction season. And so the rabbit started a very dramatic regression process by the end of 1950s. By the end of 1950s, with the appearance of the Mr. And then by the 1990s, rabbit hemorrhagic disease was a disease that evolved in several variations. And currently, a few years ago, a new variation appeared that was extremely potent, and that is the decrease of the populations that were already declining. So the combination of all of these human persecution, habitat destruction, probably mostly rabbit regression, led to the scenario that we were facing back then. So in the beginning of this century, most people will consider the Iberian lynx as a lost species. Less than 100 individuals without a captive breeding program, without a coordination, central-based coordination for conservation in both countries. And so this is a clip from a documentary from 2003. It's called The Lost Lynx. And so people, mostly in the newspapers and media, were preparing the project for the extinction of the species. But that didn't happen, and that didn't happen because there was a strong mobilization. So just to summarize the situation, so the species was facing an extreme risk of extinction in the wild, and worse than that, we only have two categories, the extinction in the wild with captive populations and total extinction, irreversible. That one. So there was a high probability of the species going extinct in the wild within 10 years, more than 50%. So this was matching the criteria of the IUCN. So the species in 2002 was classified as critically endangered, which is no longer classified as critically endangered, but back then that was the classification. So by then I was already pretty involved in the conservation of lynx. I was the national coordinator for the conservation of lynx, even without lynxes. But something was needed to be done. So there were two main events in the beginning of the century that allow us to start thinking with a little more of optimism in the recovery of the species. First of all, we have the first Iberian Lynx International Seminar in 2006, where we presented the situation. It's the first time that officially the current situation of the lynx was presented, with a complete extinction in Portugal and the total extinction in all Spanish autonomic regions, with the exception of Andalusia. So the scenario of 150 was seen in the seminar, but it was also important to present some solutions and try to reach some solutions. Of course, the solutions were basically the only possibility. We knew that by then that we couldn't expect the population to recover naturally, which was almost impossible. So 2 years later, in 2004, and this is the turning point, the second international seminar was the turning point, because by then everyone accepted that only a central coordination and only a capability program following the introduction was possible to improve this situation. And so things start happening by then. So what happened? Basically, when the animals start to recover in the two populations of lynxes from 2003 to 2014, with two life projects, both of them only by the Andalusia region. But they started doing some interventions, mostly on rabbits, in order to increase the number of reproductive females. But they also had to do some translocations of lynxes from the population of Serra Morena to Guadiana to increase genetic diversity, and to increase the number of males, because in Guadiana there were only 4 males. So if something happened to those males, things could get even worse than they were. So those translocations of 2 males, they translocated 3 males, but 2 of them were able to reproduce, so they introduced new genes on the population. But besides that, things that were happening on the field, other things outside of the field were also happening, which allow us to reach the reintroduction point. First of all, in 2003, it was officially established the cattle breeding program, with the first center located in Guadiana, but then more centers were created in order to function in this cattle breeding program, and this cattle breeding program had 2 major objectives. First of all, to produce animals that were viable for introduction, and second of all, to maintain genetic diversity, the possible genetic diversity back then, because the lynx was restricted only to 2 populations, so there was a species with a very extremely low genetic diversity. So back in 1 year later, in 2004, things start happening in the political field. So it was extremely important to get an agreement between Portugal and Spain in order to start thinking on starting the captivity program also in Portugal and the introduction in Portugal. So in the Iberian Summit in 2004, it was signed a deal, an agreement for both states to cooperate in the conservation of the lynx and the inferior eagle. This was the first step, necessary step to get access to lynxes a few years later. So in 2007, after almost 10 years of discussion, it was officially approved an official document, the Action Plan for the Conservation of Iberian Lynx in Portugal, which was the document that presented the guidelines for the conservation of the species till 2015. And then in 2015, a new action plan was developed. And so this was very important because it was a political framing of all things that was necessary to do. So finally, in 2008, Portugal and Spain, both ministers of environment, signed an agreement which allow us to get access to lynxes that were in Spain in the cattle breeding program. So in that same year, after 4 years of work, the National Center for Breeding Iberian lynx, it's called primarily, was started in 2008 to be constructed, and by 2010 started producing the first lynxes. And in 2011, the reintroduction started in Andalusia into more populations in order to reinforce the geographic distribution of the lynxes, especially in the most eastern population of Guadiana. And finally, in 2014, by the end of the year, the reintroduction started here in Portugal. And so it was a long way, about 15 years of negotiations, of programs, of legal documents, of agreements between nations, and mostly in the technical level, in the production of the connection of experience, with translocation, and also the introduction in Andalusia, the production of guidelines in order to reach the point of the introduction. So most of all, this was the steps that were done. First of all, we needed organization. So we started a strategy in Portugal, which was in the action plan. In Spain, it was in the national strategy for conservation of the lynx. And this created a work group, the lynx work group, where Portugal and Spain and other Spanish autonomy were present, in order to start creating the guidelines for the recovery of the species. Then the breeding program with a network of breeding centers, 4 breeding centers, 3 in Spain and 1 in Portugal. And then we started evaluating areas for reintroduction using the IUCN guidelines that define some protocols that we have to achieve. Some values that we have to achieve. First of all, the quality of the area, the reduction of the threat factors, everything. So we start working in rabbit populations, in habitat intervention, preparing the risk techniques, making guidelines for monetization, and then we reach the final point, which is reintroduction. And reintroduction was done using another life project, but this one it was a very complex life project. It started in 2012 and 3 years ago. And the main objective was, first of all, to increase the number of individuals in the remaining populations of lynxes. But then the most significant, most bold step, it was to identify, prepare, and establish 5 new areas of introduction, one of them in Portugal. So using this project to start working. This was basically what was proposed back then. So we have here the population, the wild population of Guadiana, the population that remained. Here in the eastern Serra Morena, the population of Andalusia that also remained. These 2 ones were created in 2011 by reintroduction also, but they were extremely close to the population of Andalusia. And now the new population, one in Portugal, in the Guadiana Valley, one in Mancha, which is Extremadura, another in Castilla, Mancha, in the area of the Serra Morena, and another one here also in the same region, in Castilla, Mancha, in the region of the We have to develop a protocol, a specific protocol for reintroduction that accounted with several variables. First of all, habitat availability. We needed at least 10,000 hectares of suitable habitat in order to reintroduce the lynx. High rabbit density, and here we have 2 criteria. First of all, rabbit density couldn't ever go below 1 rabbit per hectare during the lower density of the year, and during the lynx breeding season, it was necessary to achieve at least 4 rabbits per hectare. So it was also important to guarantee that these areas could be connected by in terms of metapopulation. So we have also to identify possible corridors and low risk of mortality. This is basically the low risk presented by poaching by human populations. So it was necessary social acceptance, but also in terms of roads. Roads are the most important factor of mortality, and so we also had to evaluate roads and probably and also possible mitigation measures. So by deciding this and by choosing the Guadiana Valley, we were already looking at the Guadiana Valley since the last 20 years as a possible area for introduction, basically because it's an area where prey appear in high levels of density, but especially the rabbit, which is most limiting food item for lynx, but lynx can also feed in other things, so on ungulates and birds and everything. But rabbit density is extremely crucial for the reproduction. And then we also have to evaluate the suitable habitat in terms of several characteristics, and also social acceptance. And things in terms of social acceptance, there were some problems in the beginning, but then when we started to get some, especially gamekeepers and landowners in our side, things started to become a little bit easier, and now I believe it's completely accepted by the population as a good thing. So we did it. We evaluated the habitat. We did some rabbit census using uniform methodology between Portugal and Spain, but we work on these results for 10 years previously to the project. So all of this was evaluated, so we determined that we have enough area, with more than 50% of the area inside protected area, with low risks of mortality because the sensitivity rate is not very high. And we assume that we could have more than 30 reproductive females in terms of carrying capacity, because it was considered the minimum number for having a viable population. So we had to establish a few goals, and for this year we started a little bit modest. We were expecting something like 50% of mortality, which didn't happen. But during the first year we wanted to start with food territory, but through 2020 at least 15 billion females. And we have more than that, about that in the last year. But the objective for this population is to achieve at least 30 females, and for the years from 2025 forward, we want to increase the occupied area and the number of breeding females and the number of territorial males. But it's quite probable to achieve these values this current year in 2025. So now what we did, first of all, our introduction strategy was something like this. First of all, the first thing is we put in advance, which is called a software release process, in order to break all the philopatric behaviors that they could have, in order to they could be also programmed in order to return to their breeding potential, such as necessary to make them stay a few weeks in captivity. Also to make them recognize that territory as their own territory, so they could stay in the area. And we did that for the first eight lynxes. And then the last two lynxes in 2015 were released directly in the wild. And then we repeated that experience in the following year. So we in 2015 we put another 2 females in the fence, and then in 2017 another one. But then we decided to stop that because it was no longer necessary, and because also we only added one fence, and the territories were already saturated outside that fence. So we started putting animals directly in the wild. The places that we choose to release the animals were not the best places. It was completely dependent on the authorization from the landowners to release the lynxes. But what we realized during these years is that the lynx movements after releasing are very unpredictable, and there are animals that were released in the same place someday, and they have completely different history. All the course of years after releasing is completely unpredictable. But from the 47 lynxes that we released now, currently there are 23 in the population. A little bit less than 50%. This doesn't mean that all of them died or didn't stay in the population. There are animals that stayed on the population, that they reproduce, but then they die. Natural causes they also said that they did what they had to do in order to contribute to the population. So it's a very good result. After 6 years of introduction, to have 48% of the animals that still on population is a very good result. But the truth is that we're probably reaching the end of for this population, because we are already achieving a very suitable number of birds, and the number of lynxes that we release each year is becoming to be insignificant when compared with the number of lynxes that are being born in the wild. So all this process is submitted to several monitoring techniques. Camera trapping is probably the most important in the field, because it's given the users more information. Not only information on the composition of the population, but also information on the status of the animals in terms of health, sex ratios, reproduction, and even space use. But all the animals that we use to the colors with two systems, the VHF, the terrestrial system, and the GSM system with the GPS system, directly the coordinates of the animals. And in 2018, we started intensive capture in order to evaluate also the health status of the population related to remove and replace colors. So we start really marking animals that were born in the wild. So in 2018, I think we captured 12 lynxes. In the next year, I think 13, and this last year, 2020, we captured 19 lynxes, and we were able to equipage the colors that took 6, I think. But most of them are expensive. Less than 1 year, and then that in those lynxes we cannot put the colors. But the last capture campaign was a very good one. So this is just an example what we can achieve with camera tracking. This is a order of lynxes, and we can not only see how many they are, therefore, and then we can identify also the mother. So this is very important. And this particular case is very interesting because this female is the female that came from Guadiana. It's a female that was born in the wild. You can by her own means to this population. It's the third case that we have registered from animals that came from Guadiana. And I think it was the first litter of that particular year. And what is also interesting in this litter is that this female exists in an area with less than 4 rabbits per hectare, which in terms of what is published in terms of theory, it was not possible for a lynx to breed here. But she's not only bred 3 times, but she's having in this particular year 4 cubs that probably them supplied. So current situation into 2020. So as you can see in the graphic, we have 47 releases, 147 births during 5 breeding seasons, and 3 lynxes that emigrated to Endangered. So the population is still increasing, and probably this year, I think it's not very likable to reach the 200 animals, among the adults and adults. But I think it's going to be pretty close at 200 animals. If we sum the birds, probably we're going to reach 200 lynxes this year. So last year we predicted that we have 83 to 96 lynxes with more than 1 here, and coming to that more 60 cats the number of birds last year. So, and also the occupied area it increased a lot. Since the Portugal, where the lynxes are mostly concentrated in the areas where they will live. And then in the next year, the population started to spread, and the orange squares represent post-war reproduction. And by this year, we have a population divided mostly in three nucleus. One central, where most of the animals concentrate. One area, a very interesting area here in the north in the USA, where a female that was released in Merkel went there, and she found a male that came from Guadiana, also a wild male. And they started breeding, and now we have here, I think this year we're going to have 4 breeding females in this area. The only problem is that all the animals that are here are descending from the first couple that occurred here in 2015. And then what is also happening is that population is expanding south to the region of Algarve, which is not very far from Guadiana. And I think this year is all of this, not this because there is a gap in rabbit distribution here, but in here there isn't any gap. And I believe that this year probably all of this is going to be connected with lynx territory. So the population is increasing in a very good rate, and we are very optimistic for the future. So just most important landmarks during all this process. first of all, in December 2014, the software release, and then in February, EDPR release, or the first couple that was put in July and in the end of 2014, or in February next year. And only in 2016, we had the first 5 births in that year. In December 2016, we detected the first lynxes that were immigrating from Guadiana, and in March 2017, we surpassed the 10 births. But then we had in the next year also a very important landmark, the first reproduction of lynxes that were born in the wild, and by last year we have more than 100 lynxes in the wild. And now we are reaching the 3rd generation of animals that were born in the wild. So in terms of reproduction, these are the results. A very good year last year with 20 breeding females and 50 birds. 2019, it was also a very important year because we have 3 liters of five cubs, which is not very normal. But we have a very interesting project in 2020, 3.3. In 2019, we have 3.5. It's a very normal year. But this year, what is going to happen? Probably 25 to 30 breeding females, and I don't know if we're going to reach 80 new lynxes. It's quite possible. So in terms of mortality, till now we detected 21 episodes of mortality, but of course mortality is much higher than this because it's very hard to detect mortality. So it's very hard to detect it in lynxes that don't have regular color. But we have just 1 case of poaching, several unknown deaths, and that were detected after 1 year or 2 years with the death, so it's not possible to change the curve. Just 1 case of disease, 2 cases of drowning in the pond, and 1 case of poison, and most important case well till now, with a very disproportional rate towards females, which is not very normal, because females usually have a lower dispersion than males. But when we compare, when we do those data from the program, unfortunately, then we can see that there's balance between males and females. We are the only ones that have this kind of discrepancy. So here we have the evolution of the population globally in terms of contingency. First of all, the dramatic situation in the beginning of the century with less than 11 individuals, but now we're reaching, I think, in this year we're going to surpass 1,000 individuals. So it's 10 times the population that we had in the beginning of the century. So I think it's a very optimistic situation by now. In terms of area also. So this is the current situation with all the populations, the natural populations increase also in a very interesting way. Guadiana is 97 lynxes, when in the beginning of the century they had less than 40 lynxes. And Guadiana, so the other wild population, which is 200 animals. And then all the areas that are reachable, they are always, all of them are very close to the environment. So the species is increasing, but the work is not finished. So what's going to be the future? So in the future, we have to have the main goal of putting the lynx with a favorable conservation status. So that means that we want to put the lynx outside of threatened species. So we want to put the lynx in a threatened. That's what we want, and we're not going to achieve that in the near future, but we are planning that for the long-term future. So we are now with a new art project. It's called Lynx Connect, and it's also as the previous one, lots of participation. Something like 20 entities are participating in this project. But the most important objective is not only to consolidate the different populations, but also to promote communities between populations. So basically, what we want to do is to, first of all, establish ecological corridors between populations with stepping stones, places where it's not possible to have a viable type of population, but where it's possible to exhibit reproduction, and the lynxes that result in that reproduction to go and colonize other areas. And the main objective is to create a metapopulation structure between all of these populations. We have some cases, some documented cases, that this is already occurring. Not only with the 3 cases that we have from lynxes that dispersed naturally from Guadiana to Guadiana, but we also have a lynx that dispersed naturally, that is born in Guadiana and dispersed with Mancha Valley. And recently we had a case of an animal that was here in Mertua, not a wild one, but captive breeding, and that dispersed to Portugal. So probably following the corridor of Sarmento. So the next project will basically focus on this into the next 5 years. Not only in the direct conservation in terms of habitats and implementing the connectivity, but also as a very important future in terms of new technology, the applications of new technology for monitoring the population, particularly with the use of drones and artificial intelligence for the identification of information. And so the main goals till 2013 after this project. So what we know now, what we know now for achieving the status that we want to achieve, to take the length of the indigenous species, species. First of all, we know that from population models that it's necessary to establish 8 more populations, and there are lots of regions that are interested in reproduction in introducing the lynx. In this new project, we have the Murcia region in Spain, but probably Catalonia and probably Castilla, Leon are going to be interested in having reproduction areas. In Portugal, we are compromising to establish 1 more reproduction area, but it's necessary to achieve that status 750 breeding females. So the captive breeding centers are going to continue to function in the next year, producing animals for introduction. Even though if the current populations reach a level that is not necessary to release animals anymore, or at least to release animals in high numbers, such as we have been done in the last year. But they are going to continue to function in order to supply this 8 more population. And it's quite possible if the growth of the population continues like this, and if more areas are committed to the reintroduction, I think it's quite possible to reach that objective by 2035. So this is the end of the presentation, and just by summarizing, I think it's a very positive example, and I think in the next years, I think we're going to increase the number of lynxes, and I also think that this project is going to be used as an example for other projects, which is already happening. And it's also a demonstration that it's possible to recover species that was so species. But now we have to face the also problems that are not possible to overcome in the near future, and one of them is the lack of genetic diversity. So thank you very much.